And it's now time in Spotlight Ukraine to break Russian myths. And as usual, we do it with our friends and partners from Stop Fake. They are working 24/7 to destroy all those Russian lies that they are spreading among their own people and among foreigners. And now I'm joined by Marko Suprun, Creative Editor of Arc.UA magazine. Marko, hello and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Marko, let's turn immediately to our first fake. So, nuclear blackmail is one of the main rhetoric of Russian propaganda. Russian authorities in the war against Ukraine. It is also one of the favorite topics of Russian propaganda. So-called journalists constantly promote the narrative that it is not Russia, but Ukraine that poses nuclear threats. And another fake has been produced. During the upcoming counteroffensive, Ukraine is going to blow the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. Let's see. The US has delivered radiation sensors to Ukraine ahead of the major Ukrainian counteroffensive planned for spring. Experts suggest that the Ukrainians may be preparing to blow up Zaporizhzhia NPP during their offensive.
Another sensation by the Kremlin media is based on a manipulative interpretation of a New York Times article. However, the article does not mention the alleged plans of the UAF to blow up Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. According to the newspaper, the decision to transfer the sensors to Ukraine is solely due to Russia's nuclear blackmail, not the actions of the Ukrainian army.
The United States is wiring Ukraine with sensors that can detect bursts of radiation from a nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb and can confirm the identity of the attacker. In part, the goal is to make sure that if Russia detonates a radioactive weapon on Ukrainian soil, its atomic signature and Moscow's culpability could be verified.
American experts believe that the Kremlin may have plans to conduct a provocation with the use of radioactive substances to blame Ukraine, and the imported sensors will not allow this to happen. Since the beginning of the full-scale war, the US Department of Energy and NEST have recorded at least 13 cases of Russian nuclear aggression in Ukraine.
So, Marko, speaking about this fake, why is Russian propaganda speaking about this nuclear threat so often lately?
Well, it's a good question. One of the main objectives of Russian disinformation is to undermine trust. And the way you undermine trust is to spread as much fear as possible. And the nuclear issue is a sensitive one for the United States, in that it is something that has been in the popular culture, has been presented as something that's very scary. So the more that the Kremlin disinformation factory can generate stories to raise the nuclear alarm, the more attention they can get to policymakers to try and divert their attention from the main goal, which is to arm and support Ukraine in the upcoming liberation of the occupied territories. It's an interesting way of trying to garner a story and amplify it via social media, as usual, in order to reestablish some sort of fear amongst policymakers that Ukraine is targeting its own civilians, its own infrastructure, not that this is a Russian invasion. It's the same fakes we've seen time and time again regarding the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. The Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant holds a special place in the Russian disinformation narrative because that was the main nuclear power plant that was cooperating with Westinghouse to modernize the nuclear fuel rods. And so that has a particular place for Russian disinformation because it was a great example of Ukrainian and American cooperation in modernizing nuclear and safe nuclear energy.
But are people really afraid when they hear such fakes, I mean, about the nuclear threats?
You know, there's a double issue. A lot of people who grew up in the 1980s, like myself, the media did a lot to increase that fear of nuclear annihilation. And unfortunately, not much has been done to allay the fears that a nuclear war is highly unlikely. I think what they're not necessarily targeting perhaps the American audience, your general viewer, but they are trying to raise fear amongst policymakers. And they do have their allies in Congress. Certain people who would rather not support Ukraine will definitely use this kind of information. It's sort of like a franchise. You create a story that has absolutely little to no basis in reality, yet others will manipulate it to their own political ends. So I don't necessarily think that Americans are afraid, but I do think that it is a fake that has potential to distract from the main objective, which is to arm and defend Ukraine.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much. Okay, let's turn to our second fake. So, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, accidentally praised the Russian military, the Kremlin propaganda thought. But as usual, this has nothing to do with the reality. The so-called praise was actually a harsh criticism. Let's see. US General Mark Milley said that at the beginning of the war, Russia sought to advance to the Dnipro. In doing so, he accidentally praised the Russian army for its professionalism as it reached not only the Dnipro, but also Kiev last year.
The Russian outlet Tsargrad wrote, distorting General Mark Milley's interview with Foreign Affairs. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff did not say a single word about the professionalism of the Russian army. On the contrary, he emphasized that the Russians have failed to accomplish any of their tasks after the invasion of Ukraine.
One of their strategic objectives was to collapse the Zelensky government, capture the capital of Kyiv, to do that relatively quickly, advance from the Russian border all the way to the Dnieper River, do that in a short amount of time, 4 to 6 weeks perhaps, and then also to cut off Ukraine's access to the Sea of Azov, by securing Kherson and Odessa. And the Russians could not militarily achieve what they set out to do.
Thus, the propaganda media have completely invented praise for their army in order to somehow cheer up Russian society.
So, Marko, when I hear about Russian fakes, I often try to answer the question about who is aimed by this fake. And often I can answer this question, but not in this case. But luckily, we have you from Stop Fake who can explain this. Well, who or what is aimed by this fake?
Yeah, this is a good one. This is an attempt to try and dispel distrust between the Ukrainian military leadership and the American military leadership. That it's an attempt to sort of get to maybe not the primary policymakers or people involved in telephone conversations day to day between Milley and, say, Zaluzhny, but those around them who may be consumers of Russian disinformation, Russian websites, and Russian news. The Russian news ecosystem. And the intent there is to sort of create the atmosphere that even say, for example, the fake is that the Americans don't believe that Ukrainians are capable of liberating their territories, and pointing a finger at Mark Milley. And so by doing so, it creates a seed of distrust amongst partners, which thankfully, because of the great cooperation between the United States and Ukraine, especially at the level of the chief of staff, as well, the Pentagon and Ukraine's with General Zaluzhny, that this is fake really doesn't have a lot of traction amongst the people involved. It's one of those fakes that is trying to muddy the water and create the fog of war between the military who are executing the decisions of the chief of staff.
Is this a good fake? I mean, good.
You know, I don't think it is. You see, I don't know if you remember, but there was a true moment between a little bit of, let's say it was disappointment because of operational security. Zaluzhny had kept information from a lot of people, because at the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion, it was better to keep things secret on a need-to-know basis. And there was rumors that the American chief of staff, that they felt out of the loop, let's put it to put it lightly. And there was a moment, but everything is good between them now. Zaluzhny has come out and said that the relationship between him and Zaluzhny and the Pentagon are better than they have ever been. So I don't think it's effective, but you see, this is an interesting approach because they're going after the military in order to create a sense that to provide ammunition to those who would like to put an end to American military aid to Ukraine. That's the target here. And by they're not necessarily expecting the fake to engender the result, but they're providing ammunition and fake information to others who would then go and present it as the truth. And that's where it's more effective at times. Not always, but at times.
Okay, I see. So let's turn to our last fake for today. So the Ukrainian armed forces are not able to counter Russian missiles. This was allegedly stated by the Ukrainian aviation expert Valery Romanenko on the Lviv-based NTA TV channel. The truth is revealed in our next story for today.
The AFU are not able to resist Russian missiles, according to an article published by the Russian edition of Politnavigator. The article allegedly refers to the conclusion of a Ukrainian aviation expert.
The Russian enemy's means of destruction are constantly improving, rendering enemy countermeasures useless. This was stated by Ukrainian aviation expert Valery Romanenko on NTA TV channel.
In fact, the expert said nothing of the sort, answering the host's question about whether Russian missile tactics have changed. Romanenko described how the enemy is improving its weapons, in particular the X-101 missile.
Well, yes, they are constantly improving the means of destruction. We are talking about X-101 missile, which has been improved in two ways. First, the navigation system, the guidance system. It is now additionally guided by an advanced optical device.
Ineffective Ukrainian air defense is a fiction and a dream of Russian propaganda. On the contrary, our military and foreign experts note that the accuracy of Ukrainian air defense has increased significantly during the full-scale war with Russia, up to 80%. Recently, Ukraine was the first country in the world to shoot down a Kinzhal ballistic missile with its Patriot air defense system. This was the pride of the Russian defense industry.
Okay, Marko, I can understand what does this fake talk about. Russian missiles are the best missiles in the world. Well, we know it's not true, but someone has to believe. Who?
Yeah, I don't think anyone believes this remotely. This is a very interesting development because if you remember about 3 months ago when Ukraine was poised, it was maybe even earlier, Ukraine was asking for Patriot missile defense systems. One of the narratives that emerged from Washington was that the Patriot system is too advanced and Ukrainians aren't ready to, aren't trained on it and won't be able to use it. And we went from not being able to use a Patriot missile battery to taking down a missile that was not supposed to be able to be taken down by a Patriot missile battery. So it seems that this fake is a complete failure. And in fact, I believe it may have been a setup of sorts, again, to undermine trust between the Western partners and the Ukrainian military establishment that they are incapable of operating this Western equipment. When everyone who is involved in providing military support to Ukraine knows this to be not true, that Ukrainians are indeed very capable. And today, Ben Wallace, the Secretary of Defense of the United Kingdom, just announced a new missile delivery. I forgot the name of it, but it's akin to the Kinzhal.
Storm Shadow.
That Ukraine. Thank you. You're right. That's it. That we're going to be receiving this new missile that was also not to be delivered to Ukraine because apparently Ukrainians couldn't operate this missile. So this fake is again trying to create the perspective that Ukrainians can't work with Western military equipment when the complete opposite is true. Ukrainians have mastered several different systems, all of them from different NATO countries and other countries as well, because it's the Ramstein Defense Group, and that's, I think, about 50 countries now that are providing some form of military assistance to Ukraine. So this fake is just one of those abject, ridiculous things that the Russian fake machine is generating. I almost get the sense that the issue is back in 2014 and 15 when they had the Internet Research Agency, Prigozhin's troll factory, that they were more creative and better prepared to create these fakes. And I think that because Prigozhin is now trying to count bullets, that he can't generate the right kind of fakes.
Oh, yeah.
So this one is just out to lunch, I would say that.
Okay, so Russian fake machine works 24/7 to make these fakes, but you people from Stop Fake are also working 24/7 to destroy these fakes and to tell all the world truth about what is really happening in Ukraine. Thank you very much for taking part in Spotlight Ukraine. This was Marko Suprun, Creative Editor of Arc.UA magazine.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.